Bonjour et bienvenue à Super Respectable. Je m'appelle Toshio. Euh, Ça va bien, Dave?
Oui, ça va bien. Je suis content d'être avec vous sur Super Respectable.
First of all, that's the extent of my French, so let's not get I won't lie and try to drag it out. I think you speak French really well. I've heard you speak it, but that's like a whole different episode, I think, on French culture for non French people in Canada. I don't know how it was for you, but I'm from Vancouver, and there is no French culture, so it was only that 1 hour every 2 weeks in school, which we
Hmm.
dreaded pretty much. But you must have, like, because living in Ottawa, you must have heard it much more out on the streets, right? Not only in class.
Um, I think that's kind of the perception in large parts of Canada, but the reality is it's English all around, unless you're in a specific area of Ottawa, uh,
Yeah.
which is called Vanier, or if you just go across the river, which didn't happen all that much. But I was very lucky. I'm very happy my parents put me in the French immersion program,
Yeah,
so I can speak a pretty functional French.
it is, and it is really a lovely language. I really like it. My French actually got better when I lived in Morocco. When I was there to learn Arabic, because when I didn't know Arabic, at least I was communicating in French. And like the more you practice it, the easier it got. So I wish I had started earlier, and I wish I knew how to speak it fluently. But maybe I'll come back to it at some point.
I think it's there. You can revive it somehow.
Anyways, Dave, how's your week going? Are you still in the paradise known as Italy?
I am
Wow.
in the home stretch, but yeah, it's been fun. It's been good to get away, and now find myself in the main part of Venice.
Hmm.
Um, Even though there's a global pandemic on and there's no cruise ships here, there's still a lot of tourists. So I'm
Really?
pretty happy that I'm located in like more local side of Venice, as we discussed last week on the pandemic island episode,
Yes.
um, where I described the shape of Venice as a fish.
The
We're
fish.
here on the tail of the fish.
Wow. And do you think like the Venice that you're in now, in the time that we've done our podcast from last week, it's really, you've enjoyed your time with the pandemic, like not the pandemic itself, but because of the pandemic, it was a good decision to go, or are you missing out because there's not a lot of things closed? Like what's your TripAdvisor rating for your trip?
I think I would say a strong 8, maybe even a 9 for my trip as a
Wow.
whole.
Yeah.
Um, Rome was unbelievably quiet,
Yeah.
and I think that was the highlight for me in terms of what was, you know, different
Yeah.
compared to non-pandemic times. It was just unbelievable how quiet it was. Venice, like I said, you still get the big crowds of tourists, but it's very noticeable, like which countries they come from. Lots of
Yeah.
Germans, lots of French, some British people, one token Canadian here. um, but yeah, I think Venice is always a bit of a challenge if you're visiting for a long stretch of time. You have to really know where you're going for food and for drink, because it has been overrun by tourists in the last few years,
Yeah.
with cruise ships and people staying with Airbnbs and all that. So you
Yeah.
really have to do your research before you enter somewhere so you don't get ripped off on the tourist menu. But
And
other than that, it's a beautiful place.
how do you do your research before you? How did you do your research before you went? Was it online? Was it from past experiences, from friends? Like whenever I
Um,
travel, I do a combination of research and no research. So
yeah,
so I like to still be surprised, but I still like to kind of know what I'm doing.
yeah, I'm very neurotic and obsessive. It's kind of a fault and a positive to anybody traveling with me.
Yeah.
You will eventually find some amazing places, but I'm very reluctant just to show up somewhere and go. I
Yeah.
mean, there are times where you walk past a place and you're like, "Wow, that looks great. There's a big crowd, a good vibe.
Yeah.
Let's go there." But
Yeah.
I'm just so reluctant to get ripped off, and I hate the feeling of being taken advantage of when I'm on holiday.
Yeah.
So I get a bit obsessive. I go on Google. I don't really do TripAdvisor so much, but I
Yeah.
try to find. Yeah, I really find Google is really good for reviews. Like going on Google Maps, because you kind of get the sense that I do is how many people are writing reviews in Italian. So then
Yes.
you get an idea that, oh, it's a local place. So
Yeah.
you can maybe try it out.
Isn't it strange how we were growing up, like Google Maps didn't exist and you'd always have to like, if you wanted to go somewhere, you'd have to like figure it all out on your own, like maybe with like Alta Vista, maybe, you know what I mean? Like maybe with like whatever you had, and then kind of figure you have to call someone, get directions. And now you can just put in a place and not only get like its location, but how to get there in the most convenient time, other people's reviews, pictures, menus. It's a whole new world. It's kind of strange that this has all happened in the last like 10 years, yeah, 10, 15 years, and maybe
Yeah,
less
and
than that.
it's hard, us old folks to explain to the new generation like how it was. That's what we're going to be able to do. We'll be able to say, when I was a kid
Yeah,
going around Europe or wherever, East Asia,
yeah,
you just sort of winged it and just showed up and did whatever you wanted and made friends at a hostel.
yeah.
But I don't know if you've stayed in hostels in the last few years. I did. I think I
Okay.
remember my last year or two of being accepted into a hostel. And it was such a different experience because people are still talking and chatting with each other.
Yeah.
But by and large, everyone's got their heads in their
Phones.
down on their phones and just not communicating as much. But when I did it, it's been 15 years ago, 16 years ago now,
Yeah.
my first Europe trip. It was awesome. You just like had a debrief with people at the end of the day and got ideas or travel buddies. And now it's harder.
So I've stayed in. You're very adventurous. I'm not as adventurous. I've stayed in one hostel for one night in my life, and it was in Singapore. And
Oh,
I was there because I was only staying in Singapore that time for one night, so I didn't want to spend a lot of money. And it was a unique experience for me. It was the first time I'd been in a room with like 15 people. So I was sort of like, is this how it works? And then my bag was right next to me, and so I pretty much held onto the bag and then like went to sleep. And the next day I was out.
use the
But
bag as a pillow.
used my bag as a pillow, and then it wasn't a bad experience. It got the job done. But I have a theory, and if anyone listening wants to argue with it, I'd be happy to kind of hear their point of view. I have a theory that in the modern day, or even for some tech savvy kids, you can get pretty good hotels or Airbnbs or motels for similar prices as hostels, I think, in some places around the world. Because I'm always able to get little deals. Now, of course, I don't have to stay in hostels because I'm older and I have a family, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you could get a good deal because I did. Do you remember a few years back I did that Southeast Asia trip where I visited like all those countries, and like a combination, of course, of costs being low in those places, but also a lot of suave kind of online research. I was able to get some pretty good hotels for relatively cheap as well. So I think you could do
Yeah, I
that.
agree. I think like right now, staying in a really nice Airbnb, and it's huge compared to the hotel
Yes.
room we were staying in the beach area,
Yeah.
and it's the same price.
Yeah.
So there are deals available, and of course, there's discounts with Airbnb with the pandemic on.
Yeah.
But, it's really quite shocking what you can get for your money in some instances.
I heard that Airbnb might be going out of business due to the pandemic. Like business is really suffering there because people are not traveling. I wonder if that's if you're kind of noticing that more on a practical level. Like if it's not, you were saying tourism is down, of course, where you are, but I wonder if a lot of businesses, international and local, are really just really trying hard to kind of chug along.
For sure. Yeah. I think I did notice quite a few shuttered shops in
Oh,
Venice. Probably it's hard for me to compare. I've only been to Venice once before, but it did seem a bit surprising that in the main center that there'd be so many shops closed. So possibly that there's been a double whammy here with the pandemic, the cruise ships not operating, and there was some floods last year. Like Venice gets more and more flooded each year.
mhm.
So it's challenging.
Is food a big part of the trip as well? Like enjoying Italian cuisine?
Yeah, but to the listeners planning their first trip to Italy, don't go to Venice and expect the best pasta of your life.
Yeah.
More of like a seafood town. So if you're not into fish and some funky calamari, then you should probably steer clear.
Yeah.
Definitely don't get pizza. This is a big tip in Venice. Don't get the pizza
Okay.
because from what I read, and this seems true, you're not allowed to have a wood-fired oven in Venice because of the obvious fire hazard.
Okay.
It's such a big risk, and I don't think the fire department is very adept at getting into the nooks and crannies of Venice. So they want to avoid that. And the pizzas you'll get are going to be pretty, just cooked in the oven that you have at home. Might as well just save that for Naples or Rome.
Oh, it's so funny you mentioned pizza. There's this little restaurant by our house. So I've lived where I am in Istanbul for like about, I think we're coming up on a year, just shy of a year. And so this restaurant we walk by, it's like this tiny little hole in the wall, but it doesn't look horrible. But we walk by it, and we've never gone to it. I've never actually even noticed it. And so a couple weeks back, it was a Sunday morning, and my wife and I just were kind of going for brunch, and we're like, oh, why don't we go to this place? So we kind of sat down, and it was really good. And while we were sitting there, we kind of got like, we saw that it had kind of had like an Italian mobster vibe to it, like that, like
Really?
that's the design it was going for. It had a picture of Marlon Brando and like, like from The Godfather, et cetera, et cetera. And so then we saw that they like, they had pizza and this, and we're like, oh, you know what? We haven't had really good pizza in a while. We should come back here one day. So actually last Friday or Saturday night, we actually stopped by for pizza, and we had a margarita pizza, and it was really good. It was like a thin crust with some basil, good cheese, and like right in the middle of nowhere. I definitely think it's like a front though, that store, because there's no one there, and these guys, like, they're cooking for no one. They're just open all the time. We were the only customers. I definitely think they're just using it for like money laundering or something. So as long as they make good pizza, that's fine with me.
So what's it like in Istanbul for international food? I mean,
you're putting me in a corner here.
Uh-oh.
Positive or negative? It's good for Turkish food, obviously. That's that's a given. International food does exist. You gotta look for it and dig a little bit. Like, we found a good Japanese restaurant a few weeks back, and that was the first time we had sushi in 9 months. So so that was good. And then there's this Russian restaurant downtown that I want to go to. I've never had Russian food. I don't know if you have or not, but I'd really like to check this place out.
Yeah, I have.
Is it good?
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. I lived in Budapest, as you know, before coming to the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And there was a couple restaurants, and I'll probably botch it, but it's called pelmeni. It's a bit like a tortellini.
Oh.
And they're very good. And
my general
borscht.
Oh, borscht. Yeah. That's
very healthy.
Good. Are pierogies Russian?
Pierogies are Polish.
Oh, Polish. Okay. So,
but each country sort of has its own take on like the dumpling
right
thing.
My theory with it when it comes to food is I'll try everything once, and after that I make a decision. If it's good, then I'll do it again. If not, I tried, but I just couldn't do it. And usually it's not that bad. Usually I can eat most foods multiple times.
Yeah.
It's only once in a while something kind of comes up where I just didn't enjoy it. But I have no problem if someone else eats it. I'd go back to the restaurant. So I'm not that picky with food,
I'm with you. I mean, this week I had squid ink.
Oh, really?
Pasta.
Nice.
And I gotta say, I'm like you. I would try pretty much anything once.
Yep.
And that was my once with the squid ink pasta. I think it's one of the most visually unappealing dishes I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's like someone just dropped some oil onto the pasta, and you're just eating that.
Yeah.
So no.
Yeah. But you tried, right? So
I tried.
There you go. Okay, before I move to my story, let me ask you one quick question. What would you think, as Canadians, what would you think would be the defining food of Canada minus poutine? Can't say poutine because poutine is very Quebecois, and to our listeners, Quebec is a province in Canada, and both Dave and I are not from that province, but they have very good food, poutine probably being the most common among them. But for us, non-Quebecois, what would be the most defining food of our country, Dave?
Once again, very good question, Toshio.
Thank you.
And I have an Italian angle to my answer.
Okay.
Craft dinner.
Craft dinner.
Here's where I'm going to go with this.
Okay, justify it. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it is Canadian. I'm not entirely sure. It's a big multinational corporation, Kraft. But
yeah.
I think it's very commonly associated with Canada. And so a couple of years ago, I went to Milan to do an Italian course.
Yeah.
And at the end of the course, they asked the students to bring a dish from their country. And this is always a challenge for a Canadian. I don't know if you've ever been asked to do this, and we're always stumped.
Yeah.
The course that I was doing had someone from Costa Rica, someone from Germany, someone from Russia, someone from the UK,
Yeah.
and me. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to buy in Milan to represent Canada? So I thought, I'll make something like craft dinner. And I found this one expat store in Milan, and I made it. I brought it to the class the following day, and I expected to be absolutely annihilated by the Italians for daring to bring in this abomination.
Yeah.
And I served it to them, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And they said, "Oh, this is nice. Is this They asked me if it was a dessert. And I said, "No, we have this for dinner sometimes."
Did you do like the fake cheese, or did you get like real good mozzarella?
I did the whole works. I did the fake cheese. I put ketchup in it.
Wow.
And they said it's nice. It's very sweet. I'll have it for dessert. And I tried telling them,
No.
this is the main course.
This is the main course. That's so funny. I would people have asked. I haven't been in a situation where like I had to bring something physically, but we've had this discussion, and I would say, those maple. I don't know the brand, but you can get multiple brands. But the food, those maple leaf cookies.
Oh yeah,
have actual maple. I think that's pretty defining of Canada. Like those are really good, and like.
They're mostly sold at airports, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. At airports. I think if you really search inside of like a Superstore or a Loblaws or like whatever your local Canadian grocery store is, you might be able to find a version. But those are the things that we give our non-Canadian friends to represent our country, and they seem to really love it as well.
Girl Guide cookies.
Guide cookies.
I think if you put maple syrup on anything and then just say
Delicious.
This is Canadian, you'd be fine.
What if we took craft dinner and put maple syrup on that? Could that sort of be a combination? Yeah.
Yeah,
our country is very rich in a number of things. I think cuisine, its own unique cuisine, it's still a growing field, like we don't have bad food that's Canadian, but I think as time goes by and as we have new chefs and new kind of trends happening, I think we'll develop it. Because if I asked you to list Canadian foods, I don't know if I can go, like if you could go about 5 or 6 Canadian based dishes, right? Like I couldn't go past 5 or 6 either, but maybe that's why Canada is so great, because we're multicultural and we bring everyone.
But I think there you go. I think you nailed it, because you would struggle in Istanbul, a city of 15, 20 million, to find a good pizza or sushi. Would stick to the Turkish.
Yeah.
But in Ottawa, a city of 1 million,
you can get everything.
You can get pretty much anything from any culture. You can have,
Yeah. If you're a super foodie, Canada might, like, to get Canadian food might be a little difficult, but I mean, you can definitely find food from around the world. I mean, you and I, we used to eat shawarmas once or twice a week.
Don't get me started on the shawarmas.
Yeah,
I got cravings right now.
I don't think I've had a good shawarma in like months or even a year at least. So like, I think that might be the first thing I do when I get back home. Get a shawarma.
Awesome.
Anyways, all right. Are you ready?
Shall we get to it?
Yeah. So I was telling Dave right before we started that I'm going to be a little gruesome in my storytelling today. So I apologize if I offend anyone or if anything is a little disturbing. I'll put the disclaimer on the notes, and when I post.
You should say earmuffs before any particular stuff.
It's pretty disturbing. I was disturbed when learning about it, but very interesting, and I think Dave you'll enjoy. But my story is about a murder that happened in our neighboring country, the United States of America, over 60 years ago, which still has not been solved. It's been referred to with many titles, but I'm going to refer to it as The Boy in the Box, which is the most common referral online. It's out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it's about a little boy who was found dead inside of a cardboard box. And to this day, they still haven't been able to identify who he was or how he was killed. And nobody has come forward. And many of the people on the case, of course, died. But still to this day, the case remains open. So it is interesting. Have you heard of this at all?
I have not.
If you're near a laptop, you can look it up. But I again, the disclaimer: some of the imagery is a little disturbing. I'm
on a work computer, so I'll refrain from any Google.
Yeah, it might be weird. Okay, so what happened? It was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on February 25th, 1957. A boy was found in a cardboard box in the forests right outside the city. So I'm going to be a detective. I'm going to present it to you in different sections. Here are the facts. Like I said, the boy is about 4 to 6 years old, about 30 pounds. He was unclothed, but wrapped in a blanket. His hair was cut with pieces of his hair that had just been cut clumped to his body because his body was wet. His fingernails seemed as though they were cared for. They were well taken care of. He had some scars on his body, especially around his ankles and the lower body, which led investigators to determine that perhaps some medical procedure had been operated on him. He had a hat, a man's hat next to him, a child's scarf on him, and there was a white handkerchief with the letter G next to him. What had happened was that he was actually found by a young man who was laying out musket traps in the forest. So he wanted to catch the local musket, and he came across this body, but he failed to report it to the police because he didn't want the police to take away his traps. So he kind of fled the scene. The next day, another man was in the neighborhood, and he was kind of going through the forest, and he came across the body, and he did not want to be involved in this whatsoever. So he left the scene. But a few days later, he did report it to the police. So when the police came up to the scene, they were able to determine that he died due to a head injury, this little boy. But because it was kind of right in the dead of winter, it was impossible to determine when exactly this guy had died. Some of the examiners had said it could have been anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks he'd been outside. So from the get-go, really strange. This kid had been missing. No one had reported it missing at all. So they got over 270 police recruits to comb over the scene for any evidence, and nothing was found other than what I'd mentioned. Nobody identified him. Nobody came forward. No one claimed that they knew him. So at this point, the authorities were completely baffled. So this is where it gets kind of gruesome. They dressed him up because they thought maybe one of the issues was that people didn't recognize his dead body or his dead face. So they wanted to make him more familiar. So they dressed him up and they stood him up kind of on a chair. They propped him up and they took pictures and they put him in the newspapers to see if anyone would know him, how he would look more recognizable. And there are pictures online of this. Again, my caution before looking at them. And it's pretty
I want to sleep tonight.
It's pretty creepy. Still, nobody knew who it was. The American Medical Association actually looked at some of the scars on his body and sent it out to some of the fellow doctors and hospitals and clinics around the world, around America, to see if any doctor had known about this patient. Maybe they had treated him or knew of his history. Again, nothing. They contacted orphanages around the country. Maybe this was a runaway or a young boy who had been in an orphanage. Nothing. People from 10 states around Philadelphia came in to take a look at the boy and see if it was somebody they could identify. Nothing. 400,000 flyers were printed, and they were attached to every bill in Philadelphia, every gas bill, and sent out. And this is actually interesting. If you go on Google, you can actually see a copy of the flyer online. So there are pictures of the boy along with what had happened and what was found, a little description, and just asking people if they know what's happening to come forward. Nothing. Remember, this is 1957, so DNA testing is not as exhaustive as it is today. So they did try their best to use fingerprints and footprints to kind of match against anything in the database. Nothing. So everything that was humanly possible was done to try to identify this boy. So at this point, authorities are just kind of baffled. Like, nobody has come forward, especially in America in 1957. We don't have technology as we do at this point, so they're trying their best, but nothing at this point. So in 1950, 1 year later, in 1958, they decide to bury this this little boy. And the detectives who are working on this case actually all chip in for his burial. This is out of their own pocket. So they get him buried, and they put him in the ground. And then sort of they kind of end that aspect of it, but they're still working on this case. So here are the major clues that have come up, though, on the case so far. So the box he was found in was a box for a bassinet for a baby carriage.
Okay.
It was from JCPenney, And the reason they know it's from JCPenney is because it was still labeled on the corner of it. And underneath the label, there was a barcode. So they were able to take the barcode and find out from which location it shipped from. So
Oh, they had barcodes back then.
they did have barcodes back then.
Huh.
I don't think it was It's probably, it wasn't digitized, but it was probably based on more kind of manual pen and paper. But they were able
Okay.
to find out which JCPenney came out of, and they found out that there were 12 bassinets sold there. But up until that, like after that, they weren't able to go any further down the line. A couple of the owners of the bassinets came forward and said, we were one of the ones who bought them. Here you go. Here's the bassinet. Here's the box. But the other ones, you know, if they didn't come forward at that time, there wasn't the technology to keep going on that front. They looked into the blanket as well to see if it was a unique blanket. They were able to get to a point where they found out that it could have been manufactured either in North Carolina, I believe, or in Quebec, Canada. So
Really?
yeah, but after that point, there's thousands of blankets, right? So again, a dead end, nothing else. Here's an interesting thing: the hat that they found next to the boy did kind of go a little further. They found out that it was a customized hat, and that they were able to trace it back to the store where it was found. And the lady who was working at the store was able to kind of give some more information. She said that a man came in alone to the store. He was between the ages of 26 and 30. He requested a very customized leather strap and buckle to the hat to be added, and he paid in cash. So they kind of had a description of a guy, at least somebody who bought the hat. But up until that point, nothing. Like after that point, they couldn't do anything further with that information. And to our listeners, I understand it's frustrating, but you got to remember it's 1957, right? So technology is not advanced. There wasn't enough manpower. You know, resources are limited. We aren't in 2020 anymore. So a lot of these leads were investigated, but they took them to the maximum limits, right? You couldn't do it anymore. So the theories are there's 5 kind of theories, 2 of which are major and 3 of which are minor. One of the theories is there was a man named Charles Seas, and the son was the boy found was his son, Terry Seas, and they had said they had tried to find Charles after this death. This was a kind of reported to him, but they couldn't find him. So this kind of led them to believe, oh, maybe this could be the guy who kind of fled the city. But they found Terry's mom, and the mother said, 100% this isn't my son. Like, no way, you know? Charles has my son. They're out of town, but this isn't him. They brought in the mom's grandparents, and the grandparents were sort of a little bit more indecisive. They said, it could be the son, you know, but maybe not. 2 days later, they find Charles Seas. He's uptown with his 8-year-old son, Terry, and Terry's well and alive. And not only that, Terry's 8 years old, and the boy the boy in question is 4 to 6. So that theory has kind of been like this, the most minor of theories, and but still presented as one. Another theory that's been brought up is that there was a forensic artist who says that perhaps one of the reasons we can't identify this boy was because he was raised as a girl, even though he was biologically a boy. And the reason he says this is because of the hair, which I was mentioning about. His theory is that this child actually had very long hair, but after he was killed, due to an unprofessional haircut by the killer, which was done in a haste, they tried to trick authorities in thinking that it was a boy all along. You can also, his theory also kind of goes along the eyebrows as well, being a little styled, which would be very uncommon for a boy at this point. So his idea was that the reason we weren't able to find anything was because even though this was a boy, he'd been living as a girl. So maybe they were tricking the authorities off a little bit. Again, it's a weak theory, and it's been investigated, but it hasn't really led to anything. There's another theory which is a little bit more interesting and more realistic. In 2007, I believe, not that far ago, only 13 years ago, there was a lady, her name was Martha, and she said that when she was 11 years old, her mother had actually paid a family to buy this little boy.
What?
Yeah, and they had named him Jonathan. The mother brought him home and really physically and sexually abused this boy for almost 2.5 years. severe beatings, drownings, food deprivation, dehydration. And one night, what had happened was the boy was fed beans, and he had thrown it up. His body had thrown it up. So the mom brought him up to the bathtub and kind of really gave him a beating. And it's due to those head injuries that the kid died. And then once he died, the mom put him into the bathtub, cut his hair and really fingernails, and then put him in the car, and then went on to dump his body with the little girl Martha. Interestingly, a man had actually stopped on the highway where they were dumping the body to ask if the women were okay. At this point, the mother had told Martha to stand in front of the license plate of the car so it wouldn't be identifiable. And the mother told the man, "No, they're okay. It's okay. Thank you so much." And the man went on his way. And the only reason we know that is because that man came forward during the investigation. However, this theory isn't really taken seriously by a lot of people because they say that Martha, in her old age, has mental illnesses, and she really isn't able to be thinking straight. In addition, a lot of the neighbors living at that time say that they never saw a young boy with this family during this time. So it's interesting that it's come out. But very much related to another theory is that there's not a lot of information, but there is a theory that a boy was sold by a family to someone at one time. So if it's interesting because that theory does relate with Martha's account of it. But then if you look at it as in terms of like a mathematical equation, if Martha's account of it isn't taken seriously or isn't been able to be corroborated, then this might not have been the son that was sold. You know what I mean? So
Unbelievable. They're talking about selling children in the 50s.
unbelievable. Even if even let's just on a side note, the boy who could have been sold, even if it's not this boy, still horrendous, right? So it's crazy. The most prevalent theory, though, is that the boy was abandoned by his family and brought into a foster home, and he was killed accidentally, and then they tried to bury his body. And there was actually a medical examiner whose name was Bristol, and he worked on this case for 36 years. And he, like I was saying, nothing really kind of came of this case, so he really took it on as a personal vendetta to get justice for this kid. And his theory was that there were foster homes in the area, and this boy must have come from one of them if no one was able to identify them. However, he wasn't able to get really far with his theory because at the time he didn't really have the resources, so it was more of a personal thing. And then unfortunately he died. So in 1996, though, another officer by the name of Augustine, he kind of took on this theory and he wanted to push it forward a little bit. And remember, 1996 is almost 40 years plus since the actual murder has happened. So this has been kind of a really dark stain in not only Philadelphia's history, but American history as well. So I guess, they just wanted justice for this. So they actually went to a psychic and they explained the story. And the psychic said that the boy was from a foster home in the area. And they brought the psychic to the location of the death. And the psychic was able to take them to the foster home in question. And remember, the psychic wasn't from this area at all. So they went to a foster home, which was about a mile and a half away from where the body was found. And when they got there, they were able to find bassinets, which were of the same make and model of the box in which the kid was found. They were able to find blankets outside, which were hanging, which are of the same model of the kid. They found out that there was a woman working in the foster home in 1957 who still was there today, who had an unborn child, but the child had died mysteriously. But there was an idea, a theory that perhaps because she was unwed and she had the child in 1957, they got rid of the body due to shame, right, of having an unwed child. But unfortunately, there wasn't enough evidence to kind of go forward with this theory, so they had to abandon it. So in November of 1998, DNA technology had advanced, and so they exhumed the body for about 8 days, and they did testing from the boy's teeth, but nothing matched in the database. In March 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a forensic facial recreation, meaning like what he would have looked like back then. And then they also added him into their database in case something pops up in the future. There's a number of people online in different backgrounds who are trying to figure out the identity of this case because it's really puzzling as well. And then not only is he known as not only is he known as the boy in the box, his tombstone reads America's Unknown Child, because nobody knows who he really is. And
Wow.
so up until this day, he's been unidentified for over 60 years, and his case remains open.
So the last big like work on the case was 1998, 1997. But like you're saying, there's still people to this day who are working on this case almost like as a personal mission.
I think so. I mean, imagine this happening in 2020. It's impossible not to identify people, right? I mean, even in the most gruesome of situations, I think we would still have the technology to identify people. But the thing that really kind of, I think, not only shocked people was the murder itself, but was the fact that this child was not connected to any other human being in the world. I mean, if any sibling or if any relative or anybody we knew had anything happen to them, we would know within hours, if not minutes, right? In the world we live in today. But it's been 60 years, and this kid hasn't had any justice and nothing come up. And really, there's been no progress on the case whatsoever. So I actually, in preparation for today's case, I was looking at a number of murders. And there were ones that were like, the world's like deadliest serial killers, and of course, and there was ones that are the most gruesome. And this one kind of stood up to me a little bit, not only because of the gruesomeness of it and the mystery behind it, but the fact that he was a kid too, right? And usually, like children are very much protected and looked upon by their parents, and just kind of taken away. I mean, they're always in eyes view and in plain sight of their parents as well. But like, it's weird that no one came forward, right? Like, it's
Like
weird that,
if he came from an orphanage, then you'd think the orphanage would have really good records on things, and
it could have been. I mean,
when something's missing, someone's missing.
Just from listening to it, which out of those 5 theories, do you think any of those hold weight, or do you have another theory potentially what could have happened? Because your theory is as fair game as any other theory.
I don't know. All those theories, nothing really stuck out at me as being
Really, kind of,
likely. I don't really have any of those ones as a favored theory. They all sound a bit far-fetched.
It's when you if you have the chance, you can see a picture of his tombstone, and it's really kind of sad. I mean, people actually in the neighborhood, it's there are some people who are still alive from 1957 who are on the case, and people who knew of it, and there are other people who their children have taken on the case, but they always make sure the tombstone is clean. They lay flowers. They kind of add memorabilia around to it. I'm looking at a picture now, and there's like stuffed animals and figurines for children and stuff. And I can definitely understand if you were the officers involved, or if you knew of the situation living at the time. It's sort of kind of like, you know what I mean, like a stain that you couldn't get rid of, or maybe that's not the best analogy, but
it would just
like,
bug you. You'd want to get to the bottom of it.
Bug you. It's really just strange. And if you were the officer involved, I think it just like, it's one of those mysteries of life that like you don't want to, you want to solve before you finish up your time, right? And so like, I think that unknowingness of it is really, really frustrating.
And the fact that there'd be some child killer walking around Philadelphia or wherever.
Yeah,
that's really terrifying. That it would happen on a one-time case, so that would mean it wouldn't be like some serial killer. The person did it once and presumably again.
It's strange. It's
do you have any preferred theories or any theories of your own?
I personally tend to lean towards that story by Martha. For some reason, I think that could be legitimate, even though she did have mental illnesses. and the neighbors this and that. I've heard of many situations where neighbors had no idea what was happening in in the house next door, not only like related to murder, but like generally speaking. And so, I mean, I've heard of mothers or parents or adoptive parents being very abusive to children as well. Everything seems legitimate in that situation. It would be horrible if that was really the case. Not only did the child suffer at the end, but throughout his life as well. But it could be there. But then again, like buying a child, you know, like we were talking about in America in like 1957 seems very, very outlandish. You know, very, very
Mm-hmm.
unrealistic. But who knows? It could be. You know. Um, it's a strange concept for sure. One thing our listeners could do is if you have the stomach, you can go on Google and look at some of the images around this story. So, like I said, you'll find a picture of the flyer that was printed out. I'll link it on our comment section. It's actually really interesting. It's almost like an old timey like wanted ad, you know.
Mm.
Unfortunately, though, of course, it's horrible news. But if you read through it, it talks about what exactly happened, what they found, and the evidence around it. And at the bottom, it says, notify a homicide unit, Detective Headquarters, City Hall, Philadelphia, at any time, day or night, in person or telephone, to submit information on the case. So, like, you know, they did ask for the help of the public as well. And this went out to this. Remember, this note went on to every resident of Pennsylvania with their gas bill. You know, so everyone in the city and everyone in the state, and I read everyone in neighboring states really did know what was happening. There's also a picture of the boy in the box when they found him. It's a little gruesome. You can kind of make it out, but it's not.
Yeah, that's one I won't be doing.
The one that's really creepy though is the picture of the boy, what he would have looked like, kind of in his full state, that was made in 1998 with a computer regeneration. So it's a picture of him as a boy, not as one of those ones that like what would he look like today. But it's because there's no pictures of him other than the ones that they had when he had passed. So this one he looks like a really happy young boy with long hair and looks like just like a really sweet kid, right? And and it's kind of creepy too to look at that because it's really just manufactured, and then it kind of indicates what it is. And then the last pictures are the ones of him when they dressed him up, so he would be look more recognizable for people, and that's really creepy because you just know he's gone, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm sorry if I can, if I'm preventing you from sleeping tonight, but I don't know. I mean, like, I don't have kids, but I can definitely understand the horror that these parents must have gone through, whoever the parents were, or maybe they didn't. I don't know, right? Maybe they were the ones who caused it, but just knowing that someone is missing a little kid out there and no one, well, no one was able to find justice for him. It's kind of heartbreaking, right?
And no one does really speak for him. I
No one.
mean,
Yeah.
you have the occasional cop or some citizen who wants to take it on, but they have no
Yeah.
real blood connection to this kid. So it's incredible that someone can come into this world and then leave it without anybody to vouch for them.
Of course. And like I think his age, and like if he was an adult, do you think it'd be any different?
Probably not, to be honest. I mean, well,
Yeah.
like, of course, a child's death is horrible and tragic, but I mean, any death in this way would, yeah, would have serious consequences.
Well, that's my story, Dave. I'm sorry it was gruesome, but it was an interesting thing that I looked at, and hopefully our viewers, like, if you have any comments or questions or anything, feel free to let us know. There's an interesting part to it, but obviously a very sad part to it as well, and it is a part of history in America.
Horrific. And why are there so many horrible serial killer murder mystery stories coming from America? I know Canada has a couple pretty horrific dudes, and they're mostly men.
Yeah.
But America seems to be number one, as usual.
That's a great question. I don't know. There are a lot of, I'm sure if we talk about the Charles Mansons or the Ted Bundys, or like there's tons of them and they're really unique. But yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know why America has them out. But by the way, if you look online, I'll post this link as well. If you look at some of the most gruesome murders or like by body count, America doesn't seem to be number one. Yeah, South American countries seem to come up. There's a guy. His name is the Beast, quote unquote, and he's known for killing over like 250 people in Colombia and neighboring countries. So I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe I'll look into that as well. We'll look into what drives people towards this, and maybe it's conditions or environment. Maybe it's society. Maybe it's television, movies, the glamorization of this stuff. Yeah, I don't know. An interesting idea.
But it's interesting. Like, would this case had it, you know, erupted in 2020, would it have been solved with all the technology we have, the citizen sleuths?
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think this is something that we could be able to turn around pretty quickly? And
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I think, like, for example, if we go through the case, I think like they could have found the box, they could have found the fingerprints, they could have found, you know, most people, I think now, I think they automatically get their fingerprints or blood or whatsoever into national databases just by birth, right, or by choice or through some type of registration, right? Like the government knows who you are, and I don't mean that as like a Big Brother thing, but I mean like even if you're born in Canada or America, like you're registered, right? And I'm sure at some point you come in contact with someone or something that has a record, you know, a video camera, or you've you know, when you go in for your shot, there's a record there, you know, your measles shot or something. So I'm pretty sure that like not only could the box have been identified, but also the kid pretty quickly. And then with medical technology, I think we could have figured out like exactly how the person perished, when they perished, how long they've been outside for. I mean, it's been 50, 60 years, so technology has clearly advanced. But the question is, could they have found the killer? I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of killers out there who are not brought to justice yet. So
that's the thing. This one has both. It has unidentified victim and unidentified killer.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. And usually, I would have imagined that you could probably find, like, say we're back in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. If one was to die, even if it was indirectly, I'm sure somebody would have been like, "Oh, I know that guy. He came into the deli," or you know what I mean? Like, I've seen that, or he would have been captured on a camera or something. But the idea that it's like a complete question mark is weird, right? Like it's strange. So, I mean, you lived in London. Isn't London one of the places where they like there's cameras everywhere? Like you show up on camera like 15 times a day or something,
for
right?
Sure.
So like I think most I don't want to say like every city is a police state, but in most cities, like I think if you live in the city, which this was, you know, you would probably show up once or twice if you're in public. You know, it's really hard not to be there. But then again, you don't know. You know, you might be stuck at home your entire life. I was gonna. It was between this and then the guy in Belgium who had locked his daughter in the basement for like 25 years. And so I was just thinking, like, if it was that and her kids, like they'd never seen daylight, right, until they got released. So like maybe it's one of those situations where this kid had never actually been in public, and so others couldn't identify him. You know.
That's more of a European specialty, the locking the kids in the basement.
Yeah, it's
Switzerland, Austrians, and Belgians.
Yeah, it's strange. I don't know. I mean, I'm excited to see what viewers think of this, and if they have comments, if they have theories, I'd love to kind of do it, put it out there. Maybe I know that from what I've read, not only this case has not been forgotten. It's been used as a storyline in a number of like those like police shows on TV, like CSI and like Law and Order. But I also know that there are people who continue to work on this case. Of course, the more time that goes by, the harder it becomes. But it's still out there. So hopefully we can keep it alive and maybe come to a resolution at some point, just to give peace to the issue.
Yeah, let's hope so. Well, thanks for that, Tosh. Great story, but very disturbing.
Yeah, great but disturbing. That's. Anyways, Dave. Bonne nuit. Have a good night.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. À bientôt.
Bientôt.